Hey there, you looking kinda cute. Don't forget to subscribe and check out my other socials for more. Enjoy. The phone rang, its shrill tone piercing through the quiet afternoon. James reached over, fumbling with the receiver before bringing it to his ear. Hello? James! Thank goodness you picked up. We've got a bit of a situation here. He recognized the voice immediately. It was Crystal, the director of their local theater group. Her tone carried a mix of urgency and hope that made James sit up straighter in his chair. What's going on, Crystal? It's Pete. He's come down with the flu and can't make it to the Christmas party performance tonight. We need someone to fill in for his role and, well, you're our only hope. James felt a flutter of excitement mixed with apprehension. He'd been part of the group for years, but usually worked behind the scenes. The thought of stepping into the spotlight both thrilled and terrified him. I don't know, Crystal. I'm not really an actor. Oh, come on. It's just a silly sketch for the party. Besides, you know all the lines already from helping with rehearsals. Please, James, we're in a real bind here. He sighed, knowing he couldn't let the group down. All right, I'll do it. What's the role again? There was a pause on the other end of the line. Well, that's the thing. It's for the hen party sketch. You'll be playing a girl. James nearly dropped the phone. A girl? Crystal, I can't. It'll be fine. Jennifer and Serena have already volunteered to help get you ready. Just come to the theater an hour early, okay? Thanks, James. You're a lifesaver. Before he could protest further, the line went dead. James stared at the phone in disbelief. What had he just agreed to? An hour later, James found himself standing awkwardly in the dressing room of the small community theater. Crystal burst through the door, followed closely by Jennifer and Serena, all three women carrying bags filled with mysterious contents. There's our star, Crystal beamed, setting her bag down on the makeup counter. Don't worry, James. By the time we're done with you, you'll be the belle of the ball. Jennifer and Serena giggled, already unpacking their supplies. James eyed the growing pile of makeup, wigs, and clothing with increasing trepidation. I'm not sure about this. Nonsense, Serena said, guiding him to a chair. Just relax and let us work our magic. For the next hour, James was poked, prodded, and transformed. Jennifer started with his face, applying foundation and concealer with expert strokes. The key is to blend, 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 she explained, demonstrating the technique. You want it to look natural, not like you're wearing a mask. James nodded, trying to follow along, but feeling completely out of his depth. He watched in the mirror as his features softened under Jennifer's skilled hands. Meanwhile, Serena was busy with his hair, fitting a long, chestnut-colored wig over his short locks. She adjusted it carefully, making sure it looked as natural as possible. Now, remember, she said, meeting his eyes in the mirror, when you're wearing a wig, you have to be careful how you move your head. No sudden jerks, or it might shift out of place. James practiced a few subtle head movements, marveling at how different he looked with long, flowing hair. Crystal supervised the whole process, offering encouragement and advice. You're doing great, James. Just wait until we get you in the dress. The dress? James had been trying not to think about that part. But soon enough, it was time. Crystal helped him into a flattering A-line dress in a deep emerald green. It hugged his waist before flaring out slightly, giving the illusion of curves he didn't possess. Now, walking in a dress is an art form, Crystal explained as James took a few tentative steps. Smaller steps than you're used to, and try to lead with your hips a bit. That's it. James practiced walking back and forth across the dressing room, gradually growing more comfortable with the unfamiliar movement. The women cheered him on, offering tips and adjustments as he went. Don't forget to sit like a lady, Jennifer reminded him. Knees together, ankles crossed, and be careful getting in and out of chairs. You don't want to give anyone a show. James laughed despite himself, enjoying the camaraderie and the unique experience. He'd never imagined he'd be learning the secrets of girlhood. But here he was, soaking it all in. As the final touches were applied, a delicate necklace, some dangly earrings, and a spritz of floral perfume, James barely recognized himself in the mirror. The person staring back at him was undeniably feminine, with soft features, long lashes, and glossy lips. "Well?" Crystal asked, a hint of pride in her voice. "What do you think?" James turned this way and that, taking in his transformed appearance. I look amazing," he admitted, a smile spreading across his face. "I can't believe it's me." The women exchanged pleased glances. "You make a beautiful woman, James," Serena said, adjusting a stray lock of the wig. "Now let's practice your character a bit before the show starts." For the next half hour, they ran through the sketch, with James growing more confident in his role with each run-through. He practiced his high-pitched girl voice, perfected his feminine laugh, and even mastered the art of pretending to be tipsy in heels. As showtime approached, James felt a mix of nerves and excitement. He'd never been on stage before, let alone dressed as a woman. But the support and encouragement from Crystal, Jennifer, and Serena had boosted his confidence immensely. "Remember," Crystal said as they prepared to leave the dressing room, "you're one of the girls tonight. Just have fun with it." James nodded, taking a deep breath. He followed the women out into the hallway, his heels clicking against the floor. As they approached the backstage area, they could hear the murmur of the audience on the other side of the curtain. "Break a leg, everyone," Crystal whispered, giving each of them a quick hug. "James, you're going to be fantastic." As the curtain rose and the lights came up, James felt a moment of panic. But then he caught sight of Jennifer and Serena, already in character and beckoning him to join them. With a silent prayer, he stepped into the spotlight. "There you are, Jessie," Jennifer called out, using his character's name. "We thought you'd never make it to your own hen party." James summoned his practiced girl voice. "Sorry I'm late, girls. Traffic was absolutely mad." He sashayed over to join them, remembering Crystal's instructions about leading with his hips. The audience chuckled appreciatively, and James felt a thrill of excitement. He was doing it. As the sketch progressed, James found himself relaxing into the role. He bantered with his girlfriends, sipped imaginary cocktails, and even flirted outrageously with a male character played by one of the other actors. The audience responded with laughter and applause, spurring him on. There was a moment when he almost tripped in his heels, but he recovered quickly, turning it into a comic stumble that fit perfectly with his supposedly tipsy character. The audience roared with laughter, and James felt a surge of confidence. He was nailing it. As the sketch came to its hilarious conclusion, with Jessie declaring her undying love for the inflatable man brought as a gag gift, James found himself caught up in the exhilaration of performance. The final lines were delivered, and the audience erupted into enthusiastic applause. Taking their bows, James felt a rush of joy and accomplishment. He'd done it. He'd not only survived his first time on stage, but had thrived in a role he never would have imagined himself playing. As they made their way backstage, James was showered with congratulations from the rest of the cast and crew. Crystal gave him a big hug, practically bouncing with excitement. "James, that was incredible! You were born for this!" He laughed, still riding the high of the performance. "I can't believe how much fun that was. Thank you for pushing me to do it." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of celebration and laughter. James, still in his Jessie costume, found himself fully embraced as one of the girls. He gossiped with the other actresses, shared makeup tips, much to his own surprise, and even joined in an impromptu dance session when someone put on some music. As the party wound down, James found himself in a quiet corner with Crystal, Jennifer, and Serena. He'd kicked off his heels hours ago, and his wig was slightly askew, but he still felt a strange sense of comfort in his feminine attire. "So," Crystal said, a mischievous glint in her eye. "Same time next year?" James laughed, shaking his head. "Let's not get ahead of ourselves, but I have to admit, this was an experience I'll never forget." Jennifer raised her glass in a toast. "To James, the most beautiful woman at the Christmas party." They all clinked glasses, giggling like schoolgirls. As James sipped his drink, he reflected on the evening. He'd stepped so far out of his comfort zone, and yet he'd never felt more accepted or more alive. It was a side of himself he'd never known existed, and now that he'd discovered it, he wasn't sure he wanted to let it go entirely. "You know," he said slowly, "I might be interested in trying out for a real role next time. Nothing as extreme as this, but maybe something small." The women exchanged delighted glances. "James," Serena said, putting a hand on his arm, "we'd be honored to have you join us on stage again. You're a natural." As the night came to a close and James prepared to change back into his regular clothes, he found himself feeling a mix of emotions. Part of him was ready to return to his familiar self, but another part was reluctant to let go of Jessie. She'd brought out a confidence and joy in him that he'd never experienced before. Catching his reflection in the mirror one last time before removing his makeup, James smiled at the woman looking back at him. "Thank you," he whispered, not entirely sure who he was thanking. Crystal for the opportunity, the women for their help, or perhaps even Jessie herself for showing him a new side of himself. As he left the theater that night, back in his regular clothes but with traces of glitter still clinging to his skin, James knew that something had fundamentally shifted within him. He'd discovered a new form of self-expression, a new way to connect with others, and a newfound appreciation for the art of transformation. Walking to his car, he found himself already looking forward to the next production. Who knew what role he might take on next? The possibilities seemed endless, and for the first time in a long while, James felt truly excited about the future. He started the engine, a smile playing on his lips as he pulled away from the theater. The Christmas lights twinkled in the darkness, seeming to wink at him conspiratorially. James laughed to himself, feeling light and free. It had been an extraordinary night, one that had changed him in ways he was only beginning to understand. As he drove home, humming along to a Christmas song on the radio, James knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter in his life. He'd stepped into a different world tonight, and while he might not live there full-time, he was grateful for the visit and looked forward to returning again soon. The theater group had given him more than just a role to play. They'd given him the chance to explore a hidden part of himself, to push his boundaries, and to discover strengths he never knew he possessed. It was a gift he would cherish long after the glitter had faded and the last traces of makeup had been washed away. As he pulled into his driveway, James made a silent promise to himself. He would embrace this newfound courage, this willingness to step outside his comfort zone. Whether on stage or off, he would carry a little bit of Jessie's confidence with him always. The morning light filtered through the curtains. His eyes fluttered open, memories of the previous night flooding back in a rush of excitement and lingering disbelief. Had it all been real? The dress, the wig, the applause? A glance at his bedside table confirmed it wasn't a dream. There, nestled among his usual clutter, sat a small pot of glitter eyeliner, a parting gift from Jennifer. James reached out, running his finger along the smooth surface of the container, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. The phone rang, startling him from his reverie. Fumbling for the receiver, he cleared his throat before answering. "Hello? James, you were absolutely marvelous last night." Crystal's enthusiastic voice filled his ear. "I hope you're not too worn out because I've got some exciting news." Sitting up straighter, James felt a flutter of anticipation in his chest. "Oh, what's that?" "Well, your performance was such a hit that we've had several requests for an encore. How would you feel about reprising your role at the New Year's Eve party?" James hesitated, caught between excitement and uncertainty. "I don't know, Crystal. It was fun, but—" "Oh, come on. You were born for the stage, James. Besides, think of all the people who missed out. We can't deprive them of your star turn, can we?" Chuckling despite himself, James shook his head. "You're incorrigible, you know that? So that's a yes?" He sighed, knowing he'd already made up his mind. All right, I'll do it. But this time I want to have some input on the costume." Crystal's squeal of delight was so loud he had to hold the phone away from his ear. "Fantastic! Why don't you come by the theater this afternoon? We can start planning." After hanging up, James sat for a moment, letting the reality of his decision sink in. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, he leapt out of bed and headed for the shower. As the warm water cascaded over him, he found himself humming the tune from last night's performance, a grin spreading across his face. An hour later, freshly showered and dressed, James stood in front of his closet, pondering. His hand hovered over his usual attire, comfortable jeans and a well-worn sweater. But something made him pause. His eyes drifted to the far corner of the closet, where a garment bag hung, containing the emerald green dress from the night before. "Why not?" he murmured to himself, reaching for the bag. If he was going to embrace this new side of himself, why not start now? Carefully, he slipped the dress on, marveling at how natural it felt now. He didn't have the wig or makeup, but somehow that didn't matter. Looking in the mirror, he saw both James and Jessie, the lines between them blurring in a way that felt exciting rather than confusing. Grabbing his keys, he headed out, a newfound spring in his step. As he drove to the theater, he couldn't help but feel like he was embarking on a grand adventure. The world looked different somehow, brighter, full of possibilities he'd never considered before. Pulling into the theater parking lot, he spotted Crystal waiting outside, her face lighting up as she saw him approach. "James! Or should I say Jessie?" She grinned, taking in his appearance. "I love that you wore the dress. It suits you, you know?" He felt a blush creep up his cheeks. "Thanks. It felt right, somehow." Crystal linked her arm through his as they walked into the theater.
"Well, my dear, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful partnership. Now let's talk about your New Year's Eve debut. I'm thinking sequins, lots and lots of sequins." James laughed, allowing himself to be swept along in Crystal's enthusiasm. As they entered the familiar space of the theater, with its lingering scent of grease paint and wood, he felt a sense of coming home. This was where he belonged, he realized. Not just as James or Jessie, but as all the different facets of himself he was only now beginning to discover. The next few weeks flew by in a whirlwind of preparations. James threw himself into rehearsals with a passion that surprised even him. He worked tirelessly on his character, refining Jessie's mannerisms and voice until they felt as natural as his own. Jennifer and Serena were constant presences, offering support and advice as he navigated this new world. They taught him the finer points of makeup application, helped him practice walking in even higher heels, and shared their own experiences of transformation and self-discovery through acting. As New Year's Eve approached, James found himself spending more and more time as Jessie, even outside of rehearsals. He'd wear a skirt to run errands or experiment with subtle makeup for a day at work. Each small step felt like a victory, a reclaiming of a part of himself he'd never known was missing. The night of the performance arrived, electric with anticipation. Backstage, James sat at his makeup station, carefully applying the finishing touches to his look. The sequined gown Crystal had chosen hung nearby, catching the light and throwing rainbows across the walls. "You ready for this?" Jennifer asked, appearing behind him in the mirror. James met her gaze, a confident smile spreading across his face. "You know what? I really am." As the curtain rose and the spotlights blazed to life, James stepped onto the stage, fully embodying Jessie. The audience gasped, then erupted into applause. In that moment, basking in the warmth of the lights and the energy of the crowd, James felt truly, completely alive. The performance was a triumph. James moved effortlessly between comedy and vulnerability, drawing laughs and tears in equal measure. As the final notes of Auld Lang Syne faded and the audience rose in a standing ovation, he felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over him. Later, as the cast and crew celebrated the new year together, Crystal pulled James aside. "I have a proposition for you," she said, her eyes twinkling.
How would you feel about taking on a more permanent role in the company, not just as Jessie, but as yourself? All parts of yourself. James felt his heart skip a beat. You mean? Crystal nodded. We need someone to help with costumes and makeup as well as to perform, someone who understands transformation from the inside out. What do you say? Without hesitation, James pulled her into a hug.
I say yes. 1,000 times yes.
As the clock struck midnight and cheers erupted around them, James looked out at the sea of smiling faces. He saw Jennifer and Serena raising their glasses to him, saw the pride in Crystal's eyes, and felt the weight of the sequined gown on his shoulders. This was his world now, a world of endless possibilities, of transformation and self-discovery, a world where he could be James and Jessie and everything in between. As the new year dawned, bright with promise, James knew that his greatest performance was yet to come, the performance of being wholly, unapologetically himself. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to check out my other socials if you want more wonderful content, early access, behind the scenes, and more. All links down below.